Traveling through history, the show that uncovers the past mysteries. Washington, Jefferson, Alexander the Great, William the Conqueror, or the independence of the states.
Well, welcome to another episode of Traveling Through History. Really glad you're with us this evening. And tonight we're going to talk about a special topic that came to my interest when we did a previous episode on the code breakers of World War II. And these were called code girls, which were largely women, both on the American side and the British side at Bletchley Park. My grandmother was one of them, and so it was a very special episode to me to highlight what she and her other colleagues did during World War II to break codes, especially the German and the Japanese codes that were going around. They were really brilliant women, and they together collectively helped to really contribute to the war effort across the board. And out of that, I talked a little bit about the Native Americans who had participated also in World War II as code talkers, not code breakers, but code talkers. And these were individuals that were out on the front lines with American troops, both in the Pacific and the European theater. And they were with commanders, often on telephones in the battlefield, and were talking in their native languages back and forth. So the Germans and the Japanese could not break those codes. So they were called code talkers. And when I started looking into it a little bit more for this episode, I found that not only had they taken a much larger role than I thought in World War II, but they had a significant impact on World War I as well. So I decided tonight to take a look at these Native American tribes and all the things they did in both wars, World War I and World War II, and really get into all the different tribes that had participated, what they did, what were the reasons they did it, and how successful it was in both wars. Even talk a little bit about tonight how the Germans tried to spy on some of these Native American tribes in between the two wars, and we'll get into some of those details. Really fascinating. The Germans knew that these Indians were having tremendous effect and not allowing them to crack the code. So in between the two wars, the Third Reich sent some people over to try to find out about these languages. So we will get into all that tonight, and then we'll also look at two short videos that will give you some more depth into the code talkers of World War I and World War II. So let's go ahead and get into it now. Well, just wanted to take a moment to do a shout out to our sponsor for tonight's Traveling Through History episode, and that is Barnes & Noble. And just one of my favorite places to go. Have one very close to my house. Go to it quite often. I like to go through there and just browse through all the great books and magazines. They have CDs, DVDs, everything you can imagine. They even have a little cafe in there. You can sit and drink your coffee or your hot chocolate. It's just a great time. And so definitely check out your local Barnes & Noble store, or go to barnesandnoble.com and go check out a book and purchase something, or just have a great afternoon sitting in there and looking at all the great offerings that they have. So again, thank you so much, Barnes & Noble, for sponsoring us tonight. We'll see you next time. All right, so these are the Native American code talkers of World War I and World War II. You can see a lot of great photos here. The Comanches, the Sioux, the Choctaws, Native Hawaiians, and other U.S. territories and Pacific Islanders. They were also participating in World War II. You had the Cherokee who were involved. And actually, I live not too far from Cherokee Reservation here in North Carolina. You had, of course, the Navajo code talkers. They're probably the most famous of all of these tribes and all the efforts they did in World War II. And then the Ho-Chunk tribe was also involved. So you had a lot of different tribes, a lot of different groups that were assisting the United States and the Allies in both of these conflicts. So really fascinating, all the things that they did. In a lot of ways, the war never could have been won on this side or that side of the Atlantic without these incredible code talkers and the languages they were using and their incredible efforts. If you think about the code breakers who were in Washington, D.C. and London, were incredibly brave for what they were doing, but in some ways they were in labs and they're protected behind doors and behind secret bunkers. These code talkers were actually out on site, on telephones, in the line of fire, in the line of battle, with their commanders. And so they were incredibly brave what they were doing. They all had different reasons for why they joined the United States military. Of course, Indian tribes had not been treated very well for most of our history. And so some of them were joining because they wanted to get protection for and more recognition of their individual tribes and be able to create a better future for their people. That was one reason. Another one was that they just felt tremendous allegiance to the United States because it was their country, even though it wasn't perfect. And still others looked at it as a really steady career, one that they could build a life on, a pension, have a steady income, and also have the valor that it would take to actually wear the U.S. uniform and help with this war effort. If you really think about both of these war efforts, everyone had to participate. Everyone was all in. And so, in reality, if you look at these tribes, they had a much larger per capita impact on both of these wars than any other racial type. So, really fascinating. Let's take a look. So, Native American code talkers in World War I, looking first at the first conflict, the concept of using Native American languages for coded communication emerged during World War I. The Choctaw Nation, in particular, was instrumental in this effort, with their language being used to send messages over field telephones, which confounded the Germans and their allies. And this was the first time they found that Choctaw could not be cracked as much as the Germans tried. Some other tribes that were participating in World War I in similar ways out in the battlefield with using their languages as communication were the Ho-Chunk, the Cherokee, Comanche, and the Sioux. All of them had individuals who were in different branches of the military, Army, Marines, Navy, to help with communications to evade our enemies cracking those codes. You can see some great pictures here of some of those very brave men who had joined up and were helping with the war effort. And a really great book called A Higher Call you should check out. So the Choctaw Nation, code talkers in World War I, there's a picture of some of them out of that tribe. In the words of Richard West Jr., the founding director of the National Museum of American Indians, language is central to cultural identity. In many ways, language determines thought. In 1918, U.S. Army officials strategized a way to use native languages as a code after hearing indigenous soldiers talking their language back and forth. They hoped messages coded in native languages would stop the possibility of enemy interception. And this had been a real problem in World War I. For many years, the Germans had often known exactly what the Allies were going to do because they were tapping into the telephones of the Allies. And they were listening and they were translating and then often knowing exactly what their movements were going to be. So they really needed some type of encryption language to use. The native code talkers of World War I used their languages to aid the war effort at a time when there was also a push to strip away native cultural identities and languages. So it was kind of a strange time for them. They were trying to get their rights back in their home country. They were trying to continue to keep their own culture and their own languages, and yet now their language was becoming very important and very critical for the war effort. When the United States entered World War I in 1917, 12,000 Native Americans volunteered for military service, even while 1/3 of the Native population was not recognized as American citizens yet by the government. Many Choctaw soldiers believed that their efforts in the war would prove their patriotism and help achieve citizenship for all Choctaw people. Choctaw soldiers had no idea that their native language would end up playing such a vital role in the Great War. So what a cool story. These people are fighting for their own citizenship, fighting for their own rights. They're joining up out of patriotism to help the war effort, and they find out that their language is so complex and not like anything else on earth, to the point where it becomes impossible for the Germans to crack. So very cool that they led the way in our World War I efforts, the Choctaw. So next is the Comanche code talkers in World War I. This was another tribe that were also involved in that war. The Comanche language was utilized for military communication also in World War I, primarily on telephone lines to ensure German eavesdroppers couldn't understand the messages. A specific example of this was Calvin Achevit, who's there on the right. You see his picture, who was recognized by the Belgian government for his use of the Comanche language in secure communications, according to the Oklahoma City Times in 1919. The first code talkers were a group of Choctaws, as we mentioned, that were in the 141st, 142nd, and 143rd Infantry Regiments of the 36th Infantry Division in World War I. During the Meuse-Argonne campaign of 1918 in France, Germans broke Allied communication codes, monitored radio and telephone lines, and captured one of every 4 runners between the different army companies. So needing a more secure means of communication, an American Army officer overheard some Choctaw soldiers conversing in their native language and realized that they may be key to success in the war. And then off of this Choctaw um, movement, the Comanche brought in, as you see, many of their own soldiers and joined up as well. And they found out that their language is actually different from Choctaw and actually different from several of the others. And they became very, very helpful, especially to the northern troops that were in Belgium and Holland. That's where they had their most effectiveness. You see a great coin there from World War I at the time that showed the code talkers and their recognition. So let's now talk about the Cherokee code talkers in World War I. And you can see there's a Cherokee regiment there on the right. Really great picture from World War I of the Cherokee Indian Regiment, most of whom became code talkers. So during World War I, the Cherokee served as code talkers using their native language to transmit secure communications for Allied forces. This pioneering use of Native American languages in military communications marked the earliest documented use of native code talkers by the U.S. Army. The Cherokee code talkers are recognized as the first documented instance of Native Americans being utilized for code communications in the U.S. Army. So what's amazing is they actually beat the Choctaw by 3 weeks being utilized in this way. So really cool that they were the first to the party, so to speak. The code talkers were drawn from the Eastern Band Cherokee, a group that maintained their language and traditions in the state of North Carolina. These Cherokee soldiers were attached to the British forces during the Second Battle of Somme, demonstrating their ability to successfully communicate under fire. Their success during World War I is considered a significant precursor to the more widely recognized use of Navajo code talkers during World War II. So as you can see, in World War I, we were having some real success with these different tribes, and they really were setting up the table for even more use of these types of languages in World War II. So the next 2 tribes to talk about in World War I were the Ho-Chunk and the Sioux. They both were involved as well. During World War I, the Ho-Chunk Nation, also known as Winnebago, used their native language as a secret code for communication, effectively thwarting German attempts to intercept military messages. 2 Ho-Chunk soldiers, Robert Big Thunder and John Longtail, were among the first to utilize this strategy near the Chateau Thierry in France in 1918. And you can see that's the 2 of them right there on the right. That was Robert Big Thunder and John Longtail. And what they would often do with these code talkers in all different divisions was they would pair them up with another person from their own tribe who spoke the same language, and they would have the 2 of them deployed together. So one of them would be writing something down on paper, taking the message down to translate it, and then the other one would be actually talking through the device. So pretty cool to think about these 2-man teams that were deployed to the different areas of the battlefield. During World War I, the Sioux Nation also played a role in the U.S. military as code talkers, using their Lakota language as a ways to transmit secret messages. While the Choctaw code talkers were more widely known, Sioux code talkers were also employed. And one notable example was Clarence Wolfe Guts. He was an Oglala Lakota code talker who served as General Paul Muller's personal radio operator. And he's a very famous, and they've done a lot of bios on Clarence Wolfe Guts as a very famous code talker at the time and was very well known within the service in World War II. We'll talk a little bit more about him a little later in the program and give you some more details. So that was the Ho-Chunk and the Sioux and their contributions to World War I as well. So as I mentioned, after World War I was over, the Allies had won. Some years later in the 1930s, when the Third Reich came to power, Germany and the Third Reich started showing an interest in and attempting to learn about Native American languages, particularly in the context of potential code talkers. So they were very aware how effective these Native Americans were in delivering these types of services to the battlefield commanders, and that they were unable to break those codes. And so you can see in between wars, when the Third Reich came to power, they wanted to find out how to break these codes. This was a direct result of the successful use of those code talkers during World War I itself. German spies were deployed to various areas of the United States and set up surveillance operations and talked to local tribes to ask them to teach them how Native American languages were structured. In the 1930s, Germany sent anthropologists and other personnel to the United States to study Native American languages, including visiting reservations, and even set up a German missionary church near Indiahoma, which is an area of Oklahoma that has a lot of Indian reserves. And you can see a picture on the right there of the German missionary building that was set up with these anthropologists and other linguistic specialists that the Germans had sent over as spies to come talk to and work with the local Indian tribes. Despite these efforts, the German attempts to disrupt the U.S. Code Talker program in World War II were largely unsuccessful. So even though they made these attempts to try to figure out the local Native American languages and document them and figure out how to break them, it was not successful, as you can see. In World War II, the process was used even more clearly and was much more successful. So really interesting there if you think about the Germans knew about it, knew that it was successful, and were finding ways that they could try to break it and try to learn about it. So Native American code talkers in World War II. So we'll shift gears now and look at the Second World War. The practice of using Native American languages for coded communication had expanded significantly in the Second War. The Navajo Nation and their Diné language was the most prominent and well-documented group of code talkers, particularly focused on the Pacific theater. The U.S. Marine Corps established a formal code talking program, utilizing the unique linguistic structure of Navajo and other languages to transmit secret tactical messages back and forth. Code talkers were often assigned in pairs, one operating the radio and the other translating messages in their native language. The code talkers played a critical role in numerous battles, including D-Day invasion, the Battle of the Bulge, and several of the Pacific theater, including the Midway battle. Their efforts helped to secure communication, save lives, contribute to the success of military operations. The Code Talkers Recognition Act of 2002 and the Congressional Gold Medal in 2013 formally recognized the significant contributions of Native American code talkers. What's amazing is that all those years passed by and these code talkers didn't brag on themselves, didn't talk about it, kept it to themselves because they were told when they entered the military these were secret programs and they were abiding by their oath, which was to not talk about these secret programs. So finally in 2002, you had this Recognition Act, and then you've had a couple of things happen since then that have really recognized the contributions these Native Americans have made to these incredible efforts we had to win these very large wars. You can see some great photos here. There's one of the Navajo Code Talkers Association. That's their logo. And then some great photos of the men who are actually out in the field, in the line of fire at battle, and all the different contributions they made. And then there's another great coin you can see there that was made of the Code Talkers. So pretty incredible. The contributions kept getting larger and larger every time we deployed these very important troops. So the Navajo Code Talkers in World War II. During World War II, the Navajo Code Talkers played a crucial role in the Pacific theater, utilizing their native language to transmit secure and rapid messages. The Navajo language, with its complex grammar and dialects, became the basis for a code that remained undecipherable by the enemy. This code proved vital for communicating troop movements, tactics, and battlefield orders, significantly impacting the Marines' success in battles like Iwo Jima and Okinawa. The Navajo language was chosen because it was unwritten and had unique structure that was difficult for outsiders to decipher. It's a really important point there that the Navajo language had really just been an oral language up to this point. There really was no written Navajo language. It just didn't exist. And so that was a huge advantage for these code talkers because nobody from the outside could really understand anything about it. Not even one word of it they could understand. Navajo code talkers were able to transmit messages significantly faster than existing code-breaking machines, saving valuable time on the battlefield. The Navajo code talkers are recognized for their bravery, resourcefulness, and significant contribution to the war effort. And again, they were largely in the Pacific theater, as you can see. There's some great photos there on the top right of them in the battlefield, writing down the messages and then communicating them over their phone systems. And then a great picture there, as you can see, of 6 of the veterans from that era meeting up again like they do every couple of years to talk about their experiences on the battlefield. And then, of course, a great picture there of the Americans pushing the flag up at the top of Iwo Jima, which was a battle they helped to actually win with their code talking. The Navajo code talkers are by far the most famous and most known of all the tribes that did this type of work. Although, as you see, there were many other tribes involved. So let's look at an example of Navajo code. So this is an example here, the letter A, Navajo words like Wolachi, which means ant, or Belasana, which means apple, or Sino, which means axe. All of them represented the letter A in this code structure. Letter B, Navajo word of Nahashchad, which is badger, represented B. And then there were some other military terms they used. Beshlo meant iron fish, and in the code it meant submarine. Deheti meant hummingbird, which in the military code meant fighter plane. So you can see down below what it meant if you were trying to say the message, send demolition team to 362B. It would be this, what looked like gibberish to the Germans. And the translation would be sheep, eyes, nose, deer, blow up, T, mouse, turkey, onion. And if you take the first letter of each of those, it spells out send demolition team to 362B. So again, the Germans were just banging their heads against the wall. So were the Japanese, and so were the Italians, because none of them could figure out how to crack it. So pretty cool to take a look at how they actually did their code. Sioux code talkers in World War II. Of course, they also were participating. The Sioux Nation code talkers who spoke Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota played a crucial role in the Pacific theater. So they were joining their Navajo brothers in the Pacific areas. They particularly participated in General MacArthur's Southwest Pacific campaign. They used their native languages to transmit coded messages, effectively obscuring sensitive military information from enemy forces. The Sioux code talkers were primarily assigned to the 1st Cavalry Division, nicknamed MacArthur's Boys. That was the name that he called it. One of the most recognized Sioux code talkers was Clarence Wolfe Guts, and you might recognize that name from a previous discussion we had a couple minutes ago, because he also participated in World War I with the Sioux. So this is one of the few code talkers that was a code talker in both World War I and World War II. He was an Ogallala Lakota speaker who served as a very young man in World War I and obviously a little bit older in World War II. Wolfguts, like other code talkers, kept quiet about his wartime missions and deeds, which is one reason they were not recognized for their contributions until just recently. Not surprisingly, his life changed dramatically after the military declassified official information about the code talker missions and feats in 2008. So again, a lot of these guys are getting their well-deserved recognition now and really are starting to come to the fore that they really did incredible things on the battlefield, and they did incredible things for our overall war effort. And they're finally getting the recognition they deserve. There's a great picture right there of Clarence Wolfe Guts and what he looked like after serving in both great wars. So the Comanche code talkers in World War II were also involved. During World War II, U.S. Army recruited 17 Comanche men to serve as code talkers, using their unwritten language to transmit secret messages in the European theater. So this is really key. As you saw, those first 2 tribes were involved in the Pacific theater, but these 17 were involved in the European theater, supporting the American and British troops there. They developed a 250-word vocabulary of coded military and geographical terms, which was never broken by the Germans the entire war. The Comanche code talkers played a crucial role in the D-Day invasion and other major campaigns. The Comanche code talkers are credited with helping to save thousands of lives and contributing to the Allied victory in Europe. Their work was essential for maintaining secure communication at all levels of command. And you can see a great picture there of one of the Comanche leaders on the top right with his cowboy hat on. That's when he's well retired and had served admirably and got the recognition he deserved. And then there's a great picture just below that of him when he had his service uniform on and when he was actually serving. So you can see what he looked like when he was a young man and actually in the war. So, and there's a great book right there you see. It's called Comanche Code of Honor. Really great book that talks about the Comanche code talkers in the European theater. So the next to talk about were the Cherokee. They also participated in World War II like they did in World War I. During World War II, Cherokee code talkers continued to use their native language to transmit messages, building upon the success of their code talkers in World War I. They played a crucial role in battlefield communications, keeping critical information secure. While the more well-known Navajo code talkers also served, Cherokee code talkers also contributed to the Allied war effort, and they were also in the European theater. Some examples of Cherokee code talkers in World War II include George Adair, who served in the U.S. Army and later became part of the Cherokee code talker program, and he was one of the real heroes in battlefield communications in World War II in the European theater. See a great picture to the right there with his hat on. That's George Adair, one of the Cherokee code talkers. And there's actually a monument now on the bottom left there you see that's on the Cherokee Nation reservation that talks about the tremendous contributions of the Cherokee during World War II. You see a couple great logos there of the Cherokee Nation that comes directly from their reservation. So pretty incredible if you think about all of the contributions of all these different tribes as they helped the United States and the Allies win these two great wars against Germany and their allies. So one group we don't want to forget about is the Native Hawaiian Code Talker Support Crew. Native Hawaiians and other Pacific Islanders served in various branches of the military, including the U.S. Army, Navy, and Marine Corps during World War II. They participated in other forms of coded communication, but their roles in the Code Talker program, specifically for Native Hawaiians, was to support the Navajo program in the Pacific Theater with both logistical and technical support. The Hawaiian language was easily cracked, so it did not provide a good source of code encryption. But these islanders were very good in helping the code talkers in all aspects of encrypted communications to ensure the program was highly successful towards American victory in the theater. So these guys, although often forgotten, were really the support crew for the Navajo. And they supported them in many different logistical ways to make sure they were successful in their code talking operations. So we definitely don't want to forget about the Native Hawaiians and the Pacific Islanders who also supported. You see a great picture there of a couple of them over in Hawaii next to one of the Code Talker monuments. They also supported again in the Pacific Theater. See a great picture on the bottom there of the memorial that's at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. So let's talk about some of the movies and TV shows that have come out that are about the Native American code talkers. You can see there's a number of really great documentaries. I looked at several of them the last couple of days, and I was really fascinated with them. The first one was True Whisperers from 2002. You can still find this on YouTube and other platforms. It was a PBS Plus production and a really, really good job of highlighting the Navajo and what they did in World War II to be successful, and how they were recruited, how they were trained, how they were brought on board, and how they were eventually deployed directly to the front, and the use of their unbreakable code. The next one was the Navajo Code Talkers of World War II. This is a 2018 documentary. I am going to put a link to this documentary in the description down below, so you can take a look at it if you like. It's really well produced and really well done. The next one is the Choctaw Code Talkers from the 2010 era. Also a very, very good documentary if you want to take a look at what the Choctaw did. There's another one, the In Search of History, Navajo Code Talkers on the History Channel. And then you have American Warriors, the Navajo Code Talkers. So you can see a theme here that most of the things that have come out are about the Navajo because they're the most famous. But there are some that you can find that are about some of the other tribes. So talking about movies, the most famous one is the one from 2002 called Wind Talkers. You see a poster of it right there. It actually was pretty well reviewed, and I actually caught some pretty good clips of this movie. I have not seen the whole thing, but the ones that I did see were really exciting. There's some great battle scenes in it. The hero in this movie is Nicolas Cage, He's one of the battlefield commanders, and he leans very heavily on the Navajo code talkers in many of the different battle scenes. And so it's really has a really cool way of highlighting the tremendous contributions of Navajo code talkers in the Pacific Theater. Does a really good job of it. So that came out in 2002. That movie is available at all the different locations you can find movies. So I highly recommend it. I'm going to be watching the rest of it here shortly. And then also some other productions that came out. The Language of Victory, American Indian Code Talkers of World War I and World War II, that came out in 2011 as an independent film. And then there was a 1994 Navajo Code Talkers, The Epic Story movie that came out. And that movie's about 50 minutes long. And I'm also planning to look at that one as well. So lots of really good stuff here for you to look into if you want to find out more and watch some of these scenes. Again, the Wind Talkers movie is really well done, and I'm looking forward to finishing that movie up. And it does a really good job of showing the kind of pressure that these Navajo guys were operating under. Not only are they trying to translate codes, write them down, communicate them over phone, but there's bombs going off all over the place, explosions and bullets whizzing over their heads. So it's pretty amazing to think that they were able to operate in that type of environment. Let's look at some of the books about Native American code talkers. There's so many good ones out there. The Choctaw Code Talkers, the Anupa Warrior, is a really excellent book and really well reviewed. We mentioned A Higher Call earlier in the program. That's a really great book. I did read that one, and it was really excellent, really well done about all the different impacts the code talkers had throughout the Pacific Theater especially. Chester Nez and the Unbreakable Code. That's a Navajo code talker story. Unsung Heroes of World War II, another great Navajo book. The First Code Talkers, there on the bottom left. That's actually about the Choctaw tribe because they were the first to the scene. The Comanche Code Talkers is all about the Comanche impact that they had. The Code Talker, you see there on the bottom middle, really good book there. And then the Navajo Code Talkers by Chester Smith. So really excellent book there. Highly recommend you check out these books and check out any resources you can get about these really fascinating tribes and all the impacts that they had on our war efforts. It really is truly fascinating to think about what they did and actually dive deep into the details. It's really, really good stuff. So I just want to thank to all those heroes, the Native American code talkers and their service. I cannot tell you how much I respect these guys, all these different tribes who signed up, participated, in a lot of cases had not been treated very well by their country, and yet were patriotic enough to join up to try to improve their people's lives, their people's situations, to try to, in some cases, gain citizenship for their people, protect their people's lands. And then also, in some cases, they were joining up for adventure, and they were joining up to help protect the only country that they know. So again, can't thank them enough for their service, and really fascinated by these guys. I want to also give a call out to the right there. That is a screenshot from the episode we did some months ago about the code breakers of World War II. And these were the women. They called them code girls. And as I said, my grandmother was one of them. So did a really fascinating episode about the code breakers of World War II. And I will also drop a link to that episode as well, so you can take a look at it if you haven't seen it yet. So let's go ahead and take a look at two videos, and we will come back and talk about them on the other side.
Hear that? That is a military code of the Choctaw Nation. Can't understand it? Neither could the Germans. Our story starts on the Western Front during World War I. The Allies are in trouble. The Germans had tapped their phone lines and deciphered their codes. As the Allies struggled to find a solution, one captain overheard two of his Native American Choctaw soldiers speaking their mother tongue. When the captain overheard the two soldiers speaking their native language,
they probably thought they were in really big trouble.
That's Nuchi Nashoba.
Hi there.
Great-granddaughter of one of those two soldiers and president of the Choctaw Code Talkers Association. Around this time, if a Choctaw were caught speaking the language, they were liable to be sent away to a re-education program. But the captain, he had a different idea.
If I can't understand what they're saying, perhaps the Germans won't understand what they're saying.
The US military began transmitting tactical messages in Choctaw, and, unsurprisingly, the Germans could not break the code. Not all military terms had a direct Choctaw translation.
Machine gun was little gun shoot fast. Ammunition was arrows, and gas was bad air.
And due at least in part to the Choctaw code talkers and their neologisms, the war ended soon thereafter.
When you look at how ironic it is for the government to say you can't speak your language, but yet they use them to help win World War I, that's pretty amazing to me.
Native Americans in World War II. In 1936, President Franklin D. Roosevelt said, "This generation has a rendezvous with destiny." When Roosevelt said that, he probably had no idea how much World War II would make his prophecy true. A part of that generation were Native Americans who, when the war started, didn't think twice to enlist in the military for the defense of their country. No ethnic group that took part in the war had made a greater per capita contribution, and no ethnic group's status was changed more by the war. The pre-war era. Although Native Americans were not drafted for World War I because they were not considered citizens of the United States until 1924, approximately 10,000 Native American men volunteered for duty in World War I. Between the two world wars, life on the reservations was difficult for Native Americans due to low levels of development and lack of economic opportunities. In 1939, the median income for Native American males living on reservations was $500, compared to the national average of $2,300. Nearly 1/4 of Native Americans had no formal education, and even for high school graduates, few forms of conventional employment existed on reservations. In the absence of conventional employment, those Native Americans who stayed on the reservations generally worked the land and farmed. America enters the war, and Native nations follow. Back in 1917, the Iroquois Confederacy had declared war on Germany. At the start of World War II, they still had not made peace, and when the war started, they were more than ready to fight. Other tribes were also eager as well. Some were willing to wait for hours in bad weather in order to sign their draft cards, often showing up with their own rifles. After the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, many Native Americans either enlisted in the armed forces or went to work in the war plants. According to one survey, by 1942, 40% of Native Americans enlisted voluntarily than had been drafted. Many women also contributed, serving in the Women's Army Corps, the Women Accepted for Volunteer Emergency Service, and the Army Nurse Corps. On the day Pearl Harbor was attacked, approximately 5,000 natives were in service. That number escalated to over 44,000 by the time the war ended. This accounted for more than 10% of the native population during wartime. Because the Choctaw code talkers had confused the Germans in World War I, the German government feared the same thing would happen again in this war. During the 1930s, Nazi agents disguised as anthropologists and writers went to native reservations and tried to learn some of the native languages. The German government also tried to befriend some native tribes, linking the swastika to a similar native symbol. The Third Reich propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels went as far as calling the Lakota Sioux Aryans. The Nazi attempt to convert natives to their cause not only failed, but, feeling manipulated, it may be one of the reasons why so many native people joined the fight against the Axis powers. They called Hitler "he who smells his own mustache," and Mussolini "gourd chin." Native American people saw Axis forces as a threat to their liberty. The Chippewa and Lakota Sioux joined the Iroquois and declared war on the Axis. Illiterate Native Americans learned to read, and those who didn't speak English learned the language so they could join the military. They organized remedial English training courses on the reservations. The war created a situation where both natives, whites, and other Americans had to operate together to defend their country. This led to weakening racial barriers in the armed forces and changed the perspective of American society. It also contributed to the post-war civil rights movement. The purchase of treasury stamps and war bonds by Native people reached $50 million by 1944. Many resources from Native reservations were used by the military industry, such as oil, gas, lead, zinc, copper, minerals, and coal. Interestingly enough, the Manhattan Project used helium from the Navajo reservation to make the atomic bombs. The Unbreakable Code. The Army once again recruited Native Americans as code talkers due to their specific languages. The tribes involved were Acoma, Apache, Assiniboine, Cree Cherokee, Chippewa, Choctaw, Comanche, Crow, Hopi, Ho-Chunk, Kiowa, Laguna, Menominee, Meskwaki, Mohawk, Muskogee, Creek, Navajo, Oneida, Pawnee, Pima, Ponca, Seminole, Sioux, Lakota and Dakota, and Tlingit. The Army and Marine Corps sent a group of 24 Navajo code talkers into the Pacific Theater, who fought in many bloody island campaigns. In North Africa, 8 soldiers from the Meskwaki tribe served as code talkers in the 168th Infantry Regiment, 34th Division. In Europe, the 4th Signal Company, 4th Infantry Division, was assigned 17 Comanche code talkers. From the D-Day landings at Normandy in June 1944 to the liberation of Paris and the Battle of the Bulge, they kept the lines of communications secure. The Japanese and Germans never broke the communications. Native Americans in the war. At basic training, Native Americans were proficient in marksmanship and bayonet fighting, and were capable of enduring thirst and food deprivation better than the average soldier. The Native American soldier had an acute sense of perception, excellent endurance, and exceptional physical coordination. Other soldiers respected Native American soldiers because of their warrior reputation. In action, Native soldiers carried feathers, medicine bundles, sweetgrass cedar, and other sacred objects as their own protective medicine. Medicines they carried were purified through the tribal rituals of purification. Many Native soldiers counted coup each time they killed enemy soldiers. As their ancestors inscribed a line on their coup sticks, modern Native soldiers did so on their rifles and bayonets. Native American soldiers first saw action in the Pacific Theater. 300 of them, including a descendant of the famous Apache chief Geronimo, took part in the defense of Bataan and Corregidor in 1942. Over 2,000 soldiers from Oklahoma and New Mexico served in the 45th Infantry Division, which fought in Italy and Central Europe. Natives also served in the 4th and 88th Division, the 19th and the 180th Infantry Regiments, the 147th Artillery Regiment, as well as the Oklahoma National Guard units. Basically, Native American soldiers fought through the entire war, from the attack on Pearl Harbor to the surrender of Japan in 1945. The Navajo and Hopi were assigned to service in the Pacific. The Comanches fought the Germans in Europe, and the Meskwakis fought them in North Africa. Soldiers from other tribes fought at various locations in Europe, the Pacific, North Africa, and elsewhere. For this service, they earned at least 71 air medals, 34 Distinguished Flying Crosses, 51 Silver Stars, 47 Bronze Stars, and 5 Medals of Honor. Life after the war. For Native Americans, World War II meant a major break from the past. Many of them made a decent living for the first time in their lives, as the native annual income after the war was raised to $2,500. The wartime and after-war industry provided jobs, so some natives moved to major cities and some stayed back on the reservations. The positive aspects were job opportunities, education, health care, and overall a higher living standard. The negative aspects of the post-war era were lessening of tribal influence and the threat of forfeiting the security of the reservations. In conclusion, Native American people learned they can live in both worlds.
The year is 1942. The Second World War is at its height, and since Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor, American strikes on outposts in the Pacific have increased. Japanese and German forces were tapping into American military communication lines intently, but their decrypting methods weren't yielding any results anymore. Why? All messages were being encrypted by Navajo code talkers.
Arizona, Arizona! Joe King, go! And then Joe
You see, codifying messages is standard practice during wartime. What wasn't standard practice was ciphering a Native American language that had no written alphabet to begin with. Navajo was one such language. You're watching Explore Mode, and today we're learning about Navajo code talkers. First things first, what are code talkers? Well, code talkers were people recruited by the military during wartime to encrypt messages using a little-known language. The term is usually used in reference to Native American code talkers who served in both the Second and First World War, transmitting tactical messages using an encoded version of their native tongue. The first Amerindian language used as code in the First World War was Choctaw, the language of a Native American tribe originally from the southeastern United States. 19 Choctaw soldiers joined American infantry forces and passed on messages using their native tongue. The language was so foreign to enemy forces that stories tell of Germans tapping into American communications and thinking that they were using a special device to record their voices underwater. But by the time the Second World War came, many Japanese scholars had already studied Native American languages, so the US had to think of other options. That's where Philip Johnston comes in. The story goes that Philip Johnston, the son of missionaries who worked on a Navajo reservation, was flipping through the pages of the newspaper when he saw that American troops were looking for newer and harder to decipher Native American language-based code. They were already working with Comanches, Choctaws, Hopis, Cherokees, among other Native American languages. Having grown up listening and speaking Navajo, Johnston knew it was the perfect language to encrypt the Marine Corps' messages. Why? At the time, Navajo was an unwritten language, which means there was no alphabetical representation of its sounds. That made it almost impossible to transliterate. It could only be interpreted by native speakers. The recruitment process was complicated. The Marine Corps had to find Navajo men who were both bilingual and met the physical requirements to join them. Some code talkers volunteered to participate in the program. Others were drafted, and many falsified documents because they were underage, some as young as 15. Apart from participating in boot camp, the men had to develop the code themselves. Literal translations were useful but easier to decipher, so they had to come up with a new method. The Marine Corps decided to use substitution instead. There were two types of codes, Type 2 codes and Type 1 codes. Type 2 codes were direct translations. Type 1 codes worked with substitution. Coders assigned a Navajo word for each letter of the alphabet and spelled out entire messages to each other. So for example, spelling out the word code would work like this. They replaced the letter C with mosi, the Navajo word for cat. The letter O was replaced with neesja, the Navajo word for owl. The D would be tlechae, or dog in Navajo. And E would be dze, or elk in Navajo. Mosi neesja tlechae dze, code. They also created special code words for certain implements of war. For example, the code word for a patrol plane was ga'agi, or crow in Navajo. A minesweeper was called cha'a, the Navajo word for beaver. One of the reasons that made Navajo a difficult language to decipher, apart from the fact that very few people spoke it at the time, is the fact that it's a tonal language. That means that differences in pitch and inflection can change the meaning of a word. Navajo has 4 tones for its vowels: low, high, rising, and falling. Other tonal languages in the world include Chinese, Vietnamese, and Thai. The Navajo code talkers memorized all substitutions during training, and according to the CIA, they were able to encode, send, and decode a message in just 2 minutes during drills. The Navajo code had proven to be a success. Roughly 400 Navajos participated in the Code Talker program, and their efforts were key to the success of Allied forces in crucial moments, such as the Battle of Iwo Jima, where they sent over 800 messages back and forth without a single mistake. Major Howard Connor, who was the signal officer of the Code Talkers at Iwo Jima, is quoted as saying, "Were it not for the Navajos, the Marines would never have taken Iwo Jima." Joey Kiyomiya was a Navajo soldier fighting in the Philippines when Japan took over in 1942. He was captured and imprisoned. Once the Japanese figured out he was Navajo, they sent him to a prison in Japan and demanded him to try to decode the messages they had intercepted. But it was impossible. Kiyomiya spoke Navajo, but he wasn't trained in Navajo code. To him, the messages were as confusing as they were to the Japanese. Of course, his captors were not pleased with his performance. Kiyomiya endured months of torture, but he not only survived life as a POW in Japan, he also survived the Bataan Death March and the bombing of Nagasaki. Kiyomiya is quoted as saying, "I salute the code talkers, and even if I knew about their code, I wouldn't tell the Japanese." The code talkers returned to America quietly. No one but their peers knew of the critical role they played in the war, mainly because the program remained classified until 1968. Up until that time, the code was still used to relay classified information during the Korean and Vietnam War. The first public recognition of the code talkers would come decades later in 2001, when then-President George W. Bush held a ceremony honoring 21 code talkers with gold and silver medals. 3 of the remaining code talkers were honored again in 2017 by President Donald Trump. The Navajo Nation today extends 27,673 square miles, covering areas in Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah. 250,000 Navajo people live in it, and they have their own flag and presidential elections. According to a 2010 census, 170,000 people speak Navajo in their homes. However, many fear the language will eventually be replaced by English, as the number of fluent speakers is dwindling. As for code talkers, few are still alive today, but their legacy and their service will live on.
So you can see pretty incredible from those videos that the contributions that they made really cannot be understated. You saw that we did highlight about 7 of the major tribes and groups that were contributing to both World War I and World War II. But as you saw from the one little clip, there were many, many more tribes that participated in that. Over 24 total Indian tribes actually contributed to one of the 2 wars. So really, it's pretty extensive, the number of contributors there were to this incredible war effort that really the whole country had to be involved in. You also saw a clip there from the movie we talked about, Wind Talkers. And so definitely check that movie out when you get a chance. There's some incredible scenes in it. And also it gave you a sense for, as you saw, the sacrifices that these Native Americans made on behalf of our country, the things that they did in both the European and the Pacific theater to make the war effort successful. And you saw that even some of the early code talking that got done in World War I started to get cracked by the Germans because they were making tremendous efforts to find ways to crack it. So one of the reasons the Navajo came in World War II and became the language of choice is because it was an unwritten language. It did not have an alphabet. It was not written down at all. And so it made for the perfect language for translation and encryption in World War II. So some really fascinating facts there, as you can see. Hopefully you enjoyed that and enjoyed this program tonight in learning about the Native American code talkers of World War I and World War II. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel. We have a lot of great topics coming your way. We're real excited to bring them to you. Again, thank you so much for the patronage and for being subscribers to the channel and all the support you give us. And we'll look forward to seeing you next time on an episode of Traveling Through History. Have a good night.
Traveling through history, the show that uncovers the past mysteries. Washington, Jefferson, Alexander the Great, William the Conqueror, or the independence of the states.